The battle for Lakewood Marina. The morning mist hung low over Lakewood, the kind of quiet that wraps you in a memory. I'd sit on my weathered deck, coffee steaming in my hands, watching the sun burn through the fog and light up the water where my boat, the Sarah Jane, bobbed gently at the dock. She wasn't just any boat, 38 feet of steel-hulled pride, built from scratch with my son, David, before he was lost to us in a far-off war. Every weld, every polished brass fitting, carried his laugh, his stubborn precision. That boat was my sanctuary, my last link to him. So when the Homeowners Association tore it to pieces, they didn't just destroy a boat, they shattered a piece of my soul. But they didn't know they'd just started a fight on water I owned. I'm Tom Hargrove, a retired marine engineer, and this is the story of how I took on a power-hungry HOA and won back our lake. It's a tale of grief, revenge, and a community that refused to bow. Stick with me, it's a wild ride. 15 years ago, my mornings were sacred. Black coffee, the creak of my deck chair, and the Sarah Jane gleaming under the dawn. She wasn't one of those gaudy fiberglass yachts crowding the lake these days. David and I built her to last, arguing over engine specs and laughing when I fumbled a wrench into the bilge. After we lost him in the Gulf, that boat became my church. It was moored legally in a slip my grandfather bought 60 years ago, part of the old Lakewood community before the big-money developers moved in. Then one Tuesday, a plastic-sleeved notice appeared, taped to the Sarah Jane's bow with gummy adhesive that marred her railing. It was a violation notice from the Lakewood Homeowners Association, a group I'd barely dealt with. My property sat on the marina's older edge, untouched by their rules, until now. They claimed they'd annexed the entire waterfront under a new charter. My boat, they said, violated their appearance standards. The nerve. A letter from their president, Karen Whitmore, invited me to discuss a remedy. I decided to pay her a visit. I found Karen by the community pool, barking orders at a guy with a clipboard. She was in her late 40s, decked out in pristine tennis whites, her smile as fake as her tan. When I introduced myself, her eyes flicked over me like I was dirt on her shoe. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, "the owner of that eyesore." I kept my cool. 30 years as an engineer teaches you patience. I showed her my deed, the riparian rights, the county permit. She waved them off. "Obsolete," she sneered. "We control the shoreline now. That boat's old and unsightly. Move it in 30 days, or we'll fine you $500 a day. If you don't pay, we'll remove it at your expense." I wasn't about to let her bully me off my own land. I prepared for the next HOA meeting, armed with deeds, permits, and photos of the Sarah Jane's construction. I stood before a board of 5, laid out my case calmly, and waited. A smug guy with a doughy face leaned into his mic. "So, you want special permission to keep your floating junkyard in our marina?" The room snickered. Karen smirked. My appeal was denied. They didn't even glance at my documents. Days later, I had a VA appointment across the county. I left at dawn and returned after dark. As I neared my street, the air reeked of diesel and oil. My gut twisted. At my slip, the Sarah Jane was gone, replaced by a pile of mangled steel and splintered wood floating in an oily slick. A demolition barge sat nearby, its crew packing up. They'd torn her apart with torches and claws. On the dock lay the hand-carved nameplate David had made, split in two. I picked it up, the jagged edges biting my palm. A cold rage settled in me. This wasn't about a boat anymore. It was war. For 2 days, I sat on the dock, staring at the empty slip. The grief was a physical ache, heavier than anything I'd felt since losing David. They hadn't just destroyed steel. They'd erased the memory of weekends spent wiring the Sarah Jane, David's voice insisting, "No room for error on the water, Dad." On the 3rd day, the numbness gave way to purpose. I called my insurance company, expecting coverage for the loss. But the agent's tone shifted when I mentioned the HOA. "Your policy excludes damages from removal of a derelict structure by a governing authority," she said. The HOA had labeled my boat a hazard in a secret vote. My claim was denied. That's when I turned engineer. I didn't just mourn the wreckage. I traced the failure to its source. I met with old-timers like Pete Larson, a former Marina board member. Over coffee, he revealed the HOA's annexation was a rushed power grab, and Karen was pushing to turn the Marina into a private yacht club with $50,000 memberships. My boat didn't fit her vision. Neither did my neighbor's flower boxes or fishing poles, which were also hit with fines. This was a takeover. In my workshop, I drilled open an old filing cabinet and found a leather folder from 20 years ago when I'd contracted with the Port Authority to survey the Marina. Inside was a 99-year lease for the submerged land under the slips, held by my dormant LLC, Lakewood Marine Services. The HOA controlled the shoreline, but I owned the water and the docks they'd built on it. They'd trespassed to destroy my boat. I called Ron Carter, a Navy buddy turned county surveyor. We spread out maps and my lease on my kitchen table. Ron traced the lines, grinning. "Tom, you don't just lease the water. You own the lake bed, 150 feet out, covering half their fancy new dock." My LLC was still active. I had them. I sent certified cease and desist letters to Karen and her board, citing my ownership and demanding they stop using my docks. At the next HOA meeting, Karen mocked my claim as fanfiction, but I was already moving. I reactivated my LLC as a commercial marina, leasing slips to a paddleboard startup and the local fire department's rescue boat. The community noticed. Kids fished freely, and the fireboat cut response times in half. Karen doubled down, erecting fences and members-only signs, finding kayaks and fishing rods. The neighborhood grew tense, but I wasn't alone. I met with longtime residents, showing them my lease and Ron's maps. Their anger matched mine. They'd fished these docks for decades. We formed the Friends of Lakewood, hired a no-nonsense lawyer, Ed Riley, and filed an injunction to halt HOA lakefront enforcement. The HOA retaliated with daily fines and a nuisance complaint accusing me of running an illegal dock. But I was ready. At the next meeting, I stood at the podium, staring at Karen. "You fined my neighbors for flower pots and fishing poles," I said. "You destroyed my boat. That ends tonight. You've been using my docks. Expect my invoice." The room froze. Then Ron walked in with a map, Ed with legal briefs, and a county lake officer confirming my ownership. The crowd erupted. Karen's smugness crumbled. Things got uglier. Karen's team forged violation notices and tried to void neighbors' insurance policies. One night, my trail cams caught her lackey, Carl Benton, cutting the fireboat's mooring line, a federal offense. Deputies arrested him on the spot. Armed with video evidence, Ed filed a lawsuit against the HOA, Karen, and her allies for destruction of property, harassment, and conspiracy. The HOA's lawyers begged to settle. In court, the terms were clear: $180,000 for my boat, the board's resignation, all lakefront fines voided, and dock control handed to a resident committee under my LLC. A new charter guaranteed public access and fishing rights. The local paper's headline read, "Veteran Saves Lakewood, HOA Dissolved." The settlement check sat on my counter for a week. It couldn't replace the Sarah Jane or David's memory. But leaving the slip empty felt like defeat. So we built again. Neighbors like Pete and the Martinez family joined me, welding, carpentry, and coffee fueling our weekends. The new Sarah Jane was sleeker, stronger, with a reclaimed oak nameplate. When we launched her, the community cheered. I added a bench by the slip with a plaque for David. For every fight worth showing up for. The lake is peaceful now. Karen moved away, Carl got probation, and the HOA faded like a bad dream. Kids fish, paddleboards glide, and I sip my coffee, watching the sunrise. They took my boat, but we took back our lake. What do you think about this story? Have you ever faced a bully like Karen or an injustice that pushed you to fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about standing up to power and reclaiming what's yours. Your voice matters, so weigh in.